The sun was just beginning to peek over the hills when Pumpkin, a plump ginger tabby with a white patch under his chin, stretched luxuriously on the windowsill. He blinked slowly at the orange sky, tail flicking in the soft morning light. Birds chirped outside, dew clung to the grass, and inside the little house, warmth and peace still lingered in the air. In the kitchen, the sound of a kettle boiling was followed by the soft clink of a mug being placed on the counter. Noah stood there, barefoot and quiet, stirring a bit of honey into his tea. His brown hair was tousled from sleep, and his eyes, gentle and warm, watched Pumpkin as he sauntered into the kitchen. "Morning, buddy," Noah said softly, crouching to scratch behind Pumpkin's ears. Pumpkin purred, rubbing his head against Noah's hand before flopping down beside his feet like a weighted pillow. It was their usual rhythm. Morning tea, soft meows, a little breakfast for both of them, and then Noah would sit by the front porch with Pumpkin curled beside him, watching the world wake up. Noah had always been a quiet soul. He preferred books to parties, rainy days to summer heat, and the comfort of his home to anywhere else. Pumpkin had been a gift from a neighbor 5 years ago, a tiny kitten with a raspy meow and an oversized purr. From that moment, they were inseparable. But that morning, something was different. Pumpkin watched as Noah moved through the house with more urgency. He opened closets, pulled out a duffel bag, folded clothes. Pumpkin trailed behind him, his usual curiosity tinged with unease. He jumped onto the bed and tilted his head as Noah packed a framed photo of the two of them. Pumpkin curled on his lap, Noah smiling in a flannel shirt. The ginger cat meowed, a soft questioning sound. Noah paused. "I know," Noah said, voice low. "It's just for a little while. I'll be back soon." Pumpkin followed him to the kitchen again, where Noah scooped a little extra food into his bowl and topped off his water. Then to the porch, where Noah knelt beside him and wrapped him in a gentle hug. "You be good, okay?" he whispered into Pumpkin's fur. "I'll be back before you know it." Pumpkin's ears twitched. He rubbed his face against Noah's jacket. He didn't understand the words, but he felt the shift. Something about the moment felt too final. The car was already running when Noah slung the duffel over his shoulder. He looked back once, hand on the doorknob, and smiled at Pumpkin sitting just inside the screen. "Love you, bud." The door clicked shut. Pumpkin padded to the window and jumped onto the sill just in time to watch Noah back out of the driveway. The tires crunched softly on gravel, and then the car disappeared down the country road. The house was quiet again, but not in its usual way. Pumpkin stayed at the window for hours. When the sun reached its peak, he moved to the front door and curled up on the welcome mat, eyes on the path where Noah had vanished. Every rustle of leaves or distant engine sent his ears twitching. He would lift his head, hopeful, then lay it back down when no one came. That night, Pumpkin slept near the door instead of his usual place at the foot of Noah's bed. And the next morning, he waited again. Days passed, then weeks. The neighbor stopped by to check on things, topping off the food and scooping the litter. She spoke kindly to Pumpkin, gave him scratches behind the ears, but it wasn't the same. Her presence only made the house feel more like a shell. Pumpkin started waiting on the porch around the same time every day, early morning when the light hit the gravel path just right. He would sit tall and still, his green eyes fixed on the horizon. He stopped playing with toys. He stopped meowing much. But he waited, every day, without fail. It was as if time paused in that house. As if Pumpkin believed that if he was patient enough, if he sat in the right spot at the right time, Noah would appear. Just like he always did. And yet, the silence stretched on. Unbeknownst to Pumpkin, Noah wouldn't be returning. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. A tragedy on a winding highway had stolen that promise. But Pumpkin didn't know. He only knew that Noah said he'd come back. And so Pumpkin waited. The days that followed Noah's departure passed in a haze of silence. Morning light filtered through the windows just the same. Birds still gathered on the fence, and the kettle still whistled in the kitchen. But the house had changed. It breathed differently now, slower, heavier. Pumpkin felt it first. He no longer followed anyone through the house. He barely meowed, unless it was to chirp softly near the door around sunset. That was when he'd sit, sometimes upright, sometimes curled like a watchful stone, staring down the gravel path as though expecting it to deliver something back. Noah's parents came by the following afternoon. They arrived with careful movements and forced smiles, bringing with them bags of groceries and a deep, unspoken grief. Noah's mother, Elaine, knelt beside Pumpkin near the porch. Her fingers, still trembling from the shock of loss, gently ran through his fur. "Hey there, sweetheart," she murmured, voice thin and brittle. "Still keeping watch, aren't you?" Pumpkin leaned into her touch, just briefly. But as soon as she stood and stepped inside, he returned to his position by the door. Elaine took over the cooking and the tidying, though she often moved through the motions like a woman underwater. Noah's father, Walter, handled the yard and repairs. He said little, just kept his hands busy and his eyes down. Every so often, he'd glance at the corner of the porch where Pumpkin sat and shake his head, quietly moved by the cat's devotion. At first, they assumed Pumpkin's behavior would pass, that like most animals he'd adjust to a new routine. But weeks turned into months, and still, every evening as the sky deepened to orange and purple, Pumpkin returned to the door. His gaze never wavered. Sometimes he would pace a little, his tail flicking with quiet frustration. Other times he simply curled up, chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on the road. He ignored toys, barely touched the sunny windowsills he used to nap on. He seemed to be conserving all his energy for the evening vigil. Elaine tried to coax him with extra treats and warm blankets. She would sit beside him sometimes with a cup of tea, talking in a soft voice about Noah's childhood. Stories about the boy who used to tie string to a stick just to get Pumpkin to chase it across the floor. She'd smile for a moment, then quietly wipe a tear from her cheek when she thought Pumpkin wasn't looking. But he always noticed, and he stayed. The atmosphere in the house became stiller. The air felt denser, as though it carried the weight of waiting along with Pumpkin. The rooms that once echoed with the rustle of turning pages, soft humming, or Noah's footsteps now held only the creaks of old wood and the hum of appliances. One night, it rained. A heavy storm that rattled the windows and soaked the porch. Elaine stood by the kitchen window, arms folded tightly around herself. "Come in, Pumpkin," she whispered, tapping the glass. But he stayed, fur damp, eyes blinking slowly as he watched the empty road. Walter came up behind her. "You think he knows?" She turned, confused. "Knows what?" "That Noah's not coming back." Elaine hesitated, then looked back at the small, soaked figure outside. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I think he's hoping he's wrong." The next morning, they found Pumpkin curled by the front door, still damp but safe. Elaine dried him gently with a towel and carried him to the couch, where he fell asleep for hours, tail twitching against the soft fabric. He would rest, yes, but when evening came again, he returned to his spot. The seasons began to shift. Leaves yellowed, then browned and fell. The air turned cool, the kind of cold that made Elaine wrap herself in thicker sweaters and Walter bring out the storm windows. Through it all, Pumpkin kept to his ritual. It wasn't just waiting. It was loyalty stitched into his bones. It was the promise of a return he believed in more than anything else in the world. And though the house remained quiet, and though the road remained empty, Pumpkin never missed a single evening. Not one. It was a bitter morning when the letter arrived. The wind carried a cold bite that pressed hard against the windows and whispered through the cracks in the wooden frame. Elaine stood in the kitchen, hands curled around a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, when Walter walked in, a single envelope in hand, his face ashen. She looked up, and everything inside her stilled. Without a word, Walter handed her the letter. The official seal was unmistakable. Her hands trembled before they even touched the paper. She opened it slowly, as though the delay might somehow soften the blow she already felt building deep in her chest. Her eyes scanned the page once, twice, before her legs gave way and she sank into a kitchen chair. "Noah!" Walter didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes shimmering. The report was brief. Noah had been in a tragic accident. The search had gone on for weeks, but there was no recovery. No remains, no closure. Elaine sat in silence for a long time, the letter clutched in her hands like it might change if she held it tightly enough. Pumpkin was watching from his usual spot by the door. His golden fur caught the light just slightly as he blinked slowly, tilting his head. He gave a soft, questioning meow. Elaine looked at him, tears spilling freely now. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "He's not coming back." But Pumpkin didn't move. He didn't understand the words, not in the way humans did, but some part of him sensed a change. The air had shifted again. The sorrow in the room was heavier than ever before. The days that followed passed like a fog. Elaine cried often. Walter grew quieter than usual, withdrawing into small tasks, avoiding conversations. They both felt swallowed by a grief so thick, the house could barely contain it. And still, every evening, Pumpkin went to the door. The sound of his soft paws on the hardwood was as consistent as a heartbeat. He would settle into his usual spot, gaze steady on the same gravel path, eyes full of silent hope. Weeks passed. Then came the conversation they had been avoiding. "We need to go," Elaine whispered one night, sitting at the kitchen table. "This house, it's too much." Walter nodded, eyes distant. "Too many memories. It's not healing. It's just hurting." They both knew it wasn't about forgetting Noah. It was about breathing again, about finding a place where every room didn't echo with absence. Packing began quietly. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, some filled with photographs and keepsakes, others left empty as they debated what to bring. Every room was touched, every drawer and cabinet, every closet, except the front porch. Pumpkin remained unmoved. Even when the furniture began to disappear, even when his food bowl was temporarily placed in the kitchen, he returned each evening to the door, stubborn and still. "He'll come with us," Elaine said one afternoon. "We'll bring him." But Walter hesitated. "I don't know if he'll go. He's waiting. He's just a cat," Elaine said softly, not believing it even as she said it. They tried, carried him gently toward the car, spoke to him kindly, but the closer they got to the driveway, the more Pumpkin squirmed. Not in panic, but in protest. His muscles tensed, his tail lashed once, and then he leapt from Elaine's arms and darted back toward the house. He paused at the door, turning to look at them. His eyes were calm, unafraid. He simply sat back down, resuming his post. Elaine knelt beside him, tears brimming again. "We don't want to leave you." Pumpkin blinked, slow and sure. Walter stood behind her, voice low. "Maybe this is where he's meant to be." So they left him. With a heavy heart and promises to check in often, they packed the last box, loaded the final suitcase, and drove away from the house that had been both sanctuary and sorrow. As the car disappeared down the road, Pumpkin remained by the door, waiting. The house stood empty now, quiet, still. But every evening, a small ginger figure could be seen at the doorstep, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a return he believed was still possible. And in that wait, he carried the echo of Noah's promise, "I'll be back." The house, though abandoned, never truly felt empty. Its wooden frame creaked with the changing weather, the windows fogged up in winter and opened wide to the chirping of spring. Ivy crept up one side. The garden grew wild with forget-me-nots and overgrown grass. But one thing always remained steady. Pumpkin. The ginger tabby never left. After Elaine and Walter moved away, neighbors from a few doors down began to notice the cat. Always there, always watching. Mrs. Keller, a retired schoolteacher who walked her dog every morning, was the first to start leaving out food. Others followed. A saucer of milk here, a tin of wet food there. A few children from the block began calling him the Watcher. But to Pumpkin, it was always the same. This house was home. Each morning, he would stretch from his curled position on the couch and walk slowly to the front door. He'd press his nose against the wooden frame, as if testing for signs. Then he'd leap onto the window ledge to peer through the glass, eyes searching the gravel path beyond. Noah had walked that path. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, it carried scents that stirred old memories. The pine from the trees Noah used to trim, the faint aroma of the cologne he wore. Pumpkin would close his eyes, lean into the breeze, and wait. As the sun climbed higher, he would retreat to the second-floor bedroom, Noah's room. It still smelled faintly of him. The bed remained untouched, the comforter slightly askew in the way Noah had always left it. Pumpkin would leap onto the bed, turn in a slow circle, and curl into the hollow where his human had once slept. Spring turned to summer, then summer cooled into fall. The leaves outside changed colors, but the ritual never did. Every evening, without fail, Pumpkin made his way back to the front door. He would sit just to the left of the threshold, where the wood was worn smooth from years of weather and paw prints. His tail would curl around his paws, and his golden eyes would focus straight ahead. Sometimes, headlights would flicker in the distance. A car door might slam, a voice might call out from another house, but never Noah's. Neighbors watched with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. They tried to coax him away during the coldest nights, setting up heated shelters on porches, offering toys and soft blankets. But Pumpkin always returned to the doorway, to his post. "He's waiting for someone," Mrs. Keller would say, shaking her head gently. By winter, frost kissed the windows, and snow gathered at the corners of the porch. Pumpkin's fur thickened, and his movements grew slower. He began sleeping more, but never forgot his routine. Each day, the seasons whispered past. He saw robins return in spring, fledglings hopping along the overgrown garden. He watched fireflies light up the dusk in summer, blinking like memories in the dark. He heard the rustle of orange leaves falling in autumn, and felt the sting of frozen air in winter. But still, the window, the door, the bed, always the same. In the quiet of the house, he was never truly alone. The floorboards still remembered footsteps. The walls still carried laughter and guitar strums from a time long gone. In his dreams, Pumpkin still felt the warmth of Noah's hand scratching gently behind his ear. He would purr in his sleep, softly, barely audible in the silent room. And every morning, he would rise and begin again. Neighbors continued to care from afar. They came by less frequently now, respecting the quiet sacredness of his vigil. Children grew up, moved away, but they remembered the ginger cat in the window, always watching, always waiting. Years passed. The paint on the house peeled, vines stretched higher, and the porch steps began to sag. But Pumpkin remained, alone but never leaving. The house had once stood with pride, crisp white shutters, a red door that welcomed all seasons, and flower beds that overflowed with color. But over the years, like all things left unattended, it began to forget what it had been. The red door faded to a dull rust. The shutters hung loose on tired hinges, one clattering in the wind like a slow metronome. The once thriving garden became a tangle of vines, brittle stalks, and stubborn dandelions. Paint peeled from the siding in strips like old wallpaper, exposing weather-worn wood beneath. Yet through it all, Pumpkin stayed. His fur, once sleek and rich like burnished copper, had dulled with age. Tufts of white fur had crept in around his eyes and chin. His tail no longer flicked with energy but hung low and swayed with the steady rhythm of weariness. He didn't leap onto the windowsill anymore. He climbed now, slowly, with effort. His paws pressed softly against the glass, leaving faint smudges like fingerprints on memories. He slept more these days and deeper, sometimes in the sunbeam that cut through a crack in the boarded-up window, sometimes on the dust-covered couch, curled tight against a faded throw blanket that still smelled faintly of laundry detergent and thyme. And always, at twilight, he rose, the same slow walk to the front door, the same pause just left of center, his spot. He'd sit, tail wrapped neatly around old paws, and watch the road. His ears twitched, even if his hearing had grown dull. His eyes squinted, watery and clouded with age, but they never stopped searching. Neighbors noticed the difference. "He's slowing down," Mrs. Keller whispered to her husband one evening as they passed the house. "Poor old thing. Teenagers who had once left snacks on the porch were adults now, returning to visit their parents and still recognizing the ginger cat on the steps. Older, smaller somehow, but unmistakably him. Children who'd never known Noah or his parents simply knew Pumpkin as the ghost guardian. The cat who watched over the house that wouldn't let go of its memories. One spring, a group of volunteers tried to trap and relocate him. They set up a large crate with food and soft bedding. They even spoke gently as they approached. Pumpkin didn't resist. He sat in the crate, quiet, calm, until they took him away. And that night, under fluorescent lights and unfamiliar walls, he refused to eat. He refused to rest. His eyes stayed fixed on the door. By morning, they let him go. He returned by dusk, limping, tired, but determined. He climbed the porch steps one at a time and collapsed at his post, as if nothing had happened. They never tried again. Sometimes, a kind neighbor left heated pads near the door in winter. Other times, fresh water and dry food appeared near his usual spot. But no one tried to pull him away from the place he had chosen. The house had long stopped being a home. Windows were boarded. The roof sagged under years of snow and wind. Moss claimed the edges of the brick walkway. But inside, in the quiet, Pumpkin still moved through the rooms like a ghost retracing a lifetime. Noah's bed still had its indentation. The hallway still echoed with familiar creaks. And the door, though chipped and warped, still framed the path where hope lingered. One late summer evening, as golden light spilled across the porch, Pumpkin struggled to climb the first step. His legs shook. He paused halfway up and sat to catch his breath. His breathing was slower now, deeper, as if pulling in the very soul of the air around him. Still, he made it. He took his place by the door, now slumping a little, his body curled tighter than usual. His head rested against the frame, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the breeze. He didn't look quite at the road this time, just slightly past it, toward the woods beyond. A few leaves drifted down around him. He didn't move. He stayed like that until the sky dimmed and stars pricked the sky. To the world, it was just another evening. To Pumpkin, it was another vigil, smaller, quieter, but no less devoted. And to the house, it was a heartbeat, faint, but still present. A single soul remembering what once was. A house becoming memory, and a cat holding it together with the last of his time. The day was unusually still. Even the birds seemed to keep quiet, their usual chirping softened to hushed tones. Sunlight filtered through the dusty glass, casting golden lines across the floor like faded paths to forgotten places. Pumpkin lay curled on the windowsill, his usual perch, though his body barely rose and fell with breath. His fur, once thick and warm, clung gently to the thinness of age. His paws twitched slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper, something distant and unseen. The world outside held its breath. Inside, a silence filled the house, not empty, but full, like a pause before a song's final note. Pumpkin stirred. In his mind, the air smelled different, fresher. The dust and damp of the old house gave way to sunlight warmed by spring. His bones didn't ache. His steps were light again, and the stiffness in his joints had melted away. He stood in the front hall, not the worn one of today, but the way it used to be. The floor gleamed, freshly polished. The red door was bright, newly painted. The scent of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. And then the sound, the unmistakable click of a key in the lock. Pumpkin turned, ears perked, eyes wide. The doorknob turned slowly. His tail swayed with anticipation, not the slow sweep of age, but a flick of joy. The door opened. Noah. There he stood, just as Pumpkin remembered. Backpack slung over one shoulder, messy brown curls half hidden beneath a beanie. His eyes were tired but kind, his smile soft and familiar. He stepped inside like no time had passed at all. "Hey, buddy," Noah said, crouching down and opening his arms. Pumpkin didn't hesitate. He leapt, not clumsily, not stiffly, but with grace, as if youth had never left him. He pressed his face into Noah's chest, purring so deeply it felt like a vibration in the air. Noah laughed, warm and quiet. "Missed you too." They stayed like that, sun pouring in from the open door, dust motes dancing around them like tiny memories come to life. Noah scratched behind Pumpkin's ears, rubbing the old familiar spot that always made his eyes close halfway in bliss. Pumpkin nudged his chin against Noah's collarbone, breathing in the scent of home, the real one, the one that had been missing, even when the house stood all around him. Outside the dream, the wind picked up. A low whistle pressed against the cracked siding of the house. It slipped through gaps in the window frame, brushing gently against Pumpkin's fur like a whisper. And in that breeze, if one stood very still, they might have heard it. "I'm home." The old house groaned slightly, not in protest, but in welcome, as if it too had heard the voice and recognized it. Pumpkin shifted in his sleep. His head fell slightly to the side, resting against the glass. His tail gave a soft, final twitch. One last breath, slow and deep, passed through his tiny lungs. And then stillness, but not the cold kind. This stillness felt full, like a lullaby's last note settling into silence. Outside, a single leaf fluttered down and landed gently on the porch. Not red, not orange, but soft green like early spring. The house did not mourn. It remembered. Inside, Pumpkin lay peacefully on the windowsill, a faint smile still visible in the lines of his little face. The sun warmed his body like a final touch. His journey, long and faithful, had ended not in loss, but in reunion. And somewhere, in that other place of dreams and memory, a boy and his cat walked down a quiet road, side by side, no longer waiting. The morning light crept slowly across the sky, pale and soft. It filtered through the brittle curtains of the front window, spilling across the worn wooden floor of the house that had once been so full of life. The house was quiet, not the kind of silence that came from emptiness, but a deep, reverent stillness, as though even time had paused. Pumpkin lay curled on the windowsill, just as he always did. His small body relaxed, his face turned toward the front door. The faintest trace of a smile seemed to touch the corners of his mouth. He was still. It was Mrs. Green, the neighbor from next door, who came by that morning with a small tin of food. She'd taken to checking in on him daily, along with the others on the street who had quietly adopted the cat who refused to leave his home. She knocked softly before letting herself in, just like always. "Morning, Pumpkin," she said, her voice warm but tired. "You hungry, sweet boy?" There was no response, no stretch, no flick of an ear. She moved closer, the smile slowly fading from her face. Setting the tin aside, she walked to the window, her breath caught in her throat. "Oh, Pumpkin." She knelt beside him, her hand resting gently against his side. But she already knew. He was gone. Peacefully, quietly, just like the way he had lived after Noah. Still waiting, still watching the door. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall just yet. Instead, she stayed with him a while, stroking his faded orange fur, whispering thanks, not just for surviving, but for reminding them, all of them, of something they'd nearly forgotten. Loyalty, hope, and the kind of love that doesn't fade, no matter how long the wait. The neighbors gathered later that day. They didn't need to say much. They just knew. A small patch beneath the tree in the front yard was chosen. The tree that had grown tall beside the porch, the one that caught all the falling leaves each autumn. They dug the earth gently, careful and slow. Someone brought a soft towel to wrap him in. Someone else brought lilies from their garden. Margaret, from 2 doors down, placed something extra into the earth before they lowered him down. A small plush mouse faded from years past. "He used to carry this around when he was younger," she said softly. Before Noah left, Noah's house, once full of joy, had become a quiet monument to time and memory. But now it was also a resting place, a marker of devotion. When the dirt was smoothed and the flowers arranged, Tom, the old handyman who once helped Noah build a tree swing, placed a small, handmade wooden nameplate at the base of the tree. Carved into it, with careful hands and a steady heart, were 4 simple words: He waited with love. That evening, the wind passed gently through the branches, carrying the scent of the earth and the warmth of a day that hadn't quite faded. The front door remained closed, but the feeling in the house was different now. Not one of longing, but of peace. Pumpkin never gave up hope. For years, through storms and silence, through empty rooms and falling leaves, he had waited. Not because he didn't understand what had happened, but because some promises are so deeply believed that time can't shake them. And maybe, just maybe, in his final dream that promise was fulfilled. Maybe he heard footsteps again. Maybe he saw Noah's gentle smile and the light that used to dance in his eyes. Maybe they walked, side by side, away from the waiting and into something timeless. In the quiet days that followed, the neighbors still passed by the house, leaving fresh flowers or small tokens by the tree. Children were told the story of a cat who waited. And sometimes, in the golden light of dusk, a few claimed to see a shadow by the windowsill, peaceful, watching home. And the wind, every now and then, whispered softly through the grass, like a voice just barely heard. "I'm home."